Okay, so let's try to catch up with the schedule a bit. So next we'll move on to the session number 3 on the environmental-related transportation and decarbonization issue. So I'll be the chair of this session. And first, let me invite Dr. Madan Regmi, the Economic Affairs Officer from Transport Research and Policy Section of UNESCAP, to give a talk entitled Transport Policy to Support Climate Action in Asia. So Dr. Regmi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Firstly, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, can you see my slide as well?
Yes, we can see your slide. Can you make it full screen, please?
Okay, I'm trying. Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, firstly, I thank ATRANS for inviting me to give the talk on this. I think this is very important topics on the transport policy and climate action. I think I see that there are other presentations who are focusing on more on the NDCs and the EV technology. So what I plan to do is actually give the overall structure of the what is the transport system in the Asia Pacific, and maybe more focusing toward the urban transport, and then see what could be some of the policy that support the climate action. So that would be my basically what I think I don't need to focus on this one. I think this is the transport is one of the contributor. I think to the climate change, as well as it has a lot of impacted by the climate change. I think recently we have seen a lot of extreme climate activity. I think the fire in Australia as well as in the Russian Federation, landslides in Japan, and I think recently we had a typhoon in Philippines as well as in Japan and the Pacific region. And there is a lot of excessive rain even in Thailand, Nepal, India, and China. So I think that we don't have to argue that I think this man-made activity has make the situation worse. And then transport actually is the more of the climate or climate intensive, carbon intensive system. And then everybody, because of the COP26, actually everybody now talks about the trying to minimize or the temperature to 1.5 degree. And there has been, I think, 2 big announcements. One was about try to reduce the inefficient fossil fuel, and second one was on the more focus on the decarbonization, as well as I think there is a big discussion on the phasing out, I think, renewable energy, phasing out or phases down, I think slow down the coal energy also. And basically there are the 2 things that this Paris Agreement talks about is about the mitigation and adaptation action. And then the country has, I think, committed their policy through the nationally determined contribution. And then these are also the 2 things there. One is actually what they try to do the country by themselves, and other targets are really related to the getting international support. I think that we need to talk that one also. And there are 2 more important issues on the sustainable development goal. One is about the double the energy efficiency, and then strengthen the resilience of the climate related hazard and the natural resources there. And again, actually, when we see the transport, the forecast for the region or even the globally, actually the passenger and the freight transport, this is ITF estimates. It will be more than double by 2050 if we compare to 2015. And then we see that Asia Pacific region, actually, we have really the major contributor in Asia Pacific region: China, India, maybe Japan, and other Russian Federation, big country. And then when you look at the sector also, I think it is about the quarter of the emission is from the transport sector. And most importantly, the road transport is the much contributor, that is 75%. And then if we try to differentiate between the freight and the passenger, so passenger transport comes about 59% and the freight transport 41%. When we look at what are the policy being done, I think we see the more focus really on the passenger transport and urban passenger transport. So I think there is a much still need to be the policy or action need to be done on the freight transport. And then we look at the how the countries and cities are doing, and actually the comparing to last decade, actually 2010 to 2019, there has been actually 41% growth in the transport emission in Asia. Even though I think that there are some progresses we have seen in the Asian city, there is a shift toward, I think, the mass public transport system. Now we are now in the talking from Bangkok, and we see that there are so much focus on the improvement of the urban passenger transport, metros or BRTs there. But the BTS also is very important. I think Chinese and Indian cities, there are a lot of BTS, BRT being developed. So this figure is just to show about the CO2 emission, transport sector 25%, industry and electricity and heat generation the topmost with the 41%. And this is just to show about the, I think, the trend and growth from the 2010 to 2019. And if you look at the the left in, actually only the Uzbekistan, Laos, Japan, Singapore, only the few countries actually have managed to reduce the transport emission. And if you look at the other side, actually you see there Nepal, Turkey, Cambodia, Mongolia, Afghanistan. Actually there is the share of the carbon emission from transport is really increasing in very high rate. Again, I think that another important aspect of the Asian city is really the high rate of the motorization, and then it is really growing. And then if you see on the left side again, actually Japan, Singapore, Philippines, and Afghanistan, to some extent, they have tried to manage reduce the rate of growth of the car in their country. But if you look at the other end, actually the Brunei, Vietnam, China, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, actually they have a really the massive increase in even, I think, if you look at the China, it is almost 400% between 2005 to 2015, the growth of the vehicle there. So we have to look at these transport structure, then how actually we try to reduce the emission or try to support the climate action. And this is again another, I think, the presenting the data in another way, that is the car ownership per 1,000 people. Again, because of the high population, I think the density, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, Vietnam, they have a really the low vehicle per 1,000 people. And if you look at the other end, Republic of Korea, Malaysia, Japan, and Brunei, actually they have a high, I think, the number of car per 100,000 people. So one of the important thing is that why more car, actually, because one focus is about you need to improve the public transport so that you get the people out of car, and then so maybe there is some reduction in the use of the personal vehicle. That is one of the policy things we are taking. And again, another different structure, very particular about the Southeast Asia and South Asia is the share of the power 2 and 3 wheeler and having total vehicle fleet. Actually, if you look at the Vietnam, it is almost 93%. I think you see the high share of motorcycle and the 3-wheeler also. Similar in Myanmar, 84%. If you look at the Thailand, it is 54%. Malaysia, 45%. So then you have to look at, I think that we talk about whole car, light utility vehicle, but again, I think the structure is that maybe we need to look at how you try to minimize the emission or try to control the growth of this, or maybe the shift people to the public transport from this power 2 and 3. It's really, and then another aspect is that because the way we design and plan the roads, they are really looking at the 4-wheeler, but here we are seeing that almost the high share of the power 2 and 3-wheeler. And another, I think I said earlier, I think the COP26 they talk and discuss about the one of the decision of the remove inefficient fossil fuel substitute, because why I think there is a growth of car and motorcycle, because government, I think, is indirectly subsidizing those operations. You look at this figure on the left side, Indonesia, Iran, and Malaysia, they are really even though the share is now decreasing, if you look at the trend, but they are still have a very high, actually, pay the fuel subsidies. And then similarly in the Azerbaijan and as well as in the Kazakhstan also on the side. So the price of this transport system is distorted. That's what I think the people are almost getting free rides. So as the COP26 said, then we need to look at the how actually we remove the make I think the competitive transport. So again, now the coming coming to the NDC, the commitment that the Asian country has made, how they want to support to this Paris Agreement and the reduced emission. And when you look at this analyze the policy of Asian city, we see that the first priority, the topmost priority are the electric mobility, shift to the electric mobility, and then the use of the alternative energy like the biofuel, LPG and CNG, and the improvement of the public transport. Actually, these are one of the top three priority of the Asian country. And then again, comparing to the freight and passenger, actually the most of the policy are focused on the passenger transport and the urban transport. And again, I think when really we try to analyze the policy, I think they don't really relate to the specific target. And then many countries also doesn't have the specific emission reduction target there. And this one, I just wanted to update. I think we have been actually analyzing the case studies of the city, how the public transport system is. And we, UNESCAP, use the 10 indicator system. And within that, the greenhouse gas emission per capita in the city also is one of the indicator. So by analyzing data and what is the structure of transport, then actually you can plan the evidence-based intervention. Actually, if you look at those two charts, two spider diagram there, I think the GHG emission per capita in Dhaka was really high and Bangkok was relatively okay. Actually, so the analysis done in 2019. And another aspect of the Asian transport system is that, okay, we have a formal transport system, private transport system, but there is really the train or the existence of the informal transport. Actually, in the Bangkok, you have Samlor and other type of firm, and that actually provide the services to the poorer people and try to connect the last and first mile connectivity. And if you look at some of the figure there, Jakarta, almost 50% of the passenger transport actually is taken by the informal transport, and similarly in the city in Bangladesh, Khulna, Hong Kong, China, Kuala Lumpur. So again, actually we talk much of the formal transport, but the informal transport also they need some attention, I think, in terms of how actually we can help them, I think, to improve their service. And most of the situation has been that the safety and then and the quality and reliability of services of these informal transport system. And again, actually the active mobility, actually because of the COVID-19, I think we have seen that there is a much shift toward the taking to cycling and walking. And then if you look at the structure also, I think this data is before COVID, but we still see many people actually prefer to walk, just like Bhopal and Kathmandu 42%, Dhaka 17%, Ho Chi Minh 23%. And then by improving infrastructure of the walking and cycling also, actually you can take some share of the passenger transport system, and that in way also try to improve the health and well-being, because it that one, as well as the reduced emission from the transport system as well. So important thing is that, okay, we knew about how the structure of the transport system in the Asia Pacific system. So basically, actually, we transport policymaker, we try to focus on this ASI frameworks, very popular avoid, shift, and improve framework. So and then there are so many policies related to these three frameworks: avoid, reducing travel demand, and then trying to integrate with the compact city planning, as well as the discouraging private mode of transport. And shifting is to shift to the public transport, metro bus, as well as the non-motorized transport and the energy efficient transport mode, as well as the increasing the load factor of the private car, that is the car sharing. And improving energy efficiency and the electric mobility, as well as the alternate energy. Actually, this year we did some sort of the analysis and modeling of the ASI framework related to the passenger transport in the Asia Pacific region. And then model analysis of the 5 scenarios showed that I think avoid is not really effective there. And you can have almost 20% emission reduction by the shift, but most effective, I think, more than 60%. and we look at the scenario at 2030 and 2050, energy efficiency and the electric mobility is the most prominent, I think, scenario that it will help with the carbon reduction. Actually, at the end, also the publication, and then you can find some detail if you are interested in the modeling exercise there on this one. Again, I think maybe you will hear more about electric mobility in the later presentation, but just looking at what is the current situation, actually, China is leading in Asia as well as in globally. And this is 2019 the sales scenario. China have 58% of all the vehicle sales there. And then the Republic of Korea with 1% and 2%. But in other, you see the United States and all European countries. And China also has done good in terms of the public transport also. And then there are 3-4 cities, all public transport actually running on the electric mobility in the Chinese city. And then what we see the challenges for the policymaker or maybe for the researcher, what we see is that there are more policy and research done in the passenger transport. Maybe we need to shift more on the focus also. And we need to see the structure of the Asian transport sector actually, because we see that there are a high share of the informal transport, non-motorized transport, but there are really the less study done on, okay, if we shift to the non-motorized transport, how much contribution it can make to the emission reduction or maybe on the mobility there. And then to see how to decarbonize the motorcycle two-wheelers as well as the three-wheeler. And then there is a more focus needed toward the planning and then basically monitoring. What we see in this UNDC is that, okay, there are the specific target and this thing, but maybe there is not really the clear roadmap toward how I think you would be achieving those. And then that also still leak the trajectory. And then, as I said earlier, that because the modeling, the energy efficiency and the electric mobility, they have the high potential, but these are really how the technology will be evolved. So these are the technology dependent. And then many developing Asia also, they need how the technology be diffused there. And then that's what I think the importance to have the collaboration among the researcher and the policymaker about the setting the target for the decarbonized. I just want to briefly mention about the one initiative actually we have just started because of this importance of the electric mobility. We want to start some sort of the regional initiative to promotion of the electric mobility in transition on basically focusing on the public transport. And we are doing some case study in Georgia, Laos. Actually, Thailand also is one of the pilot country. And then what we look at because what we see is that there is the policy is mentioned, but there is really the lack in implementation on the field. And then we will try to bring all the stakeholders together and see, and then try to define the national or operational strategy on those things. And finally, after bringing those case studies from there as well as from the China, we try to establish some sort of the regional initiative on the EV. And we are already discussing for the collaboration with the UNEP or Green Growth Institute. In case of Thailand, actually, we are collaborating with the King Mongkut University of Technology to do some emission saving study about and then operational strategy there. And then we are also looking at some SMR project in the ASEAN country to collaborate on that one. This will be about the 2-year project. And finally, on some of the takeaway, actually, what we have seen is that there is already commitment. I think COP26 made commitment and country has made a commitment and UNDC. But I think that we need to link those commitments to the clear roadmap and then how you will monitor. And then you really don't know that if you implement this policy, what will be the end result in 2030 and the 2050. I think that now you know about the Thailand latest policy is that they say 30 by 30. They want to have the 30% of the electric vehicle by 2030. So we have about 8 years now. And then so it has to be supported by the manufacturing as well as the, and the public uptake there. And then another important aspect is that because many countries have already committed, I think the carbon neutral by 2050. And then actually everybody is saying, I think you need to scale up implementation. It's not only about electric mobility and energy efficiency. you need about whole, all the coordination with the other sector also. Just like energy sector, you need to have a green energy to have the electric mobility, to reduce emission. Maybe on the manufacturing sector, safety, security. So we need all the collaboration, and then that is the integrated planning and cross-sectional collaboration you need. And then you just need a partnership with the global initiative alliance as well as the private sector, because private sector has a really a greater role to delivery on this electric mobility and the technology. And an important aspect is the financing, how because the many NDCs are national NDC are linked to the finance being received from the developed or other development partner that is linked. And then another important issue is that usually this NDC is led by the environmental ministry in the country. And then there, I think that we need to strengthen role of the transport ministry also. Their role of we transport policymaker as well as the transport practitioner, researcher, I think that has to be fit to that policy making process. And then actually that will be very useful and then toward the decarbonization path. And another important aspect I mentioned about this is whole about the mitigation, but we have seen rise in all the climate activity, but we don't have to, we need to take care of the adaptation also plan, because these climate activities are become more frequent and intense, and then we need to live with it as well as how to adapt with that system. And finally, actually, as I mentioned, this is the review of developments in transport Asia and Pacific. Just released last week during our ministerial conference on transport. So it talks about the sustainable, inclusive, and resilient urban transport. It talks about the impact of COVID-19 on mobility. Bangkok is also one of the case studies, Jakarta, Manila. And then you have actually one chapter on the modeling of modeling analysis I mentioned, and that indicates the electric mobility and the energy efficiency is one of the important aspects to achieve the decarbonization of transport sector. Thank you very much, and then I'll be happy to answer any question you may have if we have some time in the later. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Regmi, for your high information. And I think there's many statistic information, especially in the last slide that you showed the report that just came out recently, and I think we can use it for our further collaboration. And I think it will be nice that one of your slides showing that you have already collaboration with GIZ and also the KMUTT, which will be our next two speakers. So now hold the question until the end. So next, may I invite Ms. Urda Eichhorst from the she is a project director of the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia Climate Coordination, and she's online from GIZ in Germany, and her title would be talk on the zero carbon transport by mid-century, Rhetoric or reality. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just turning on my mic, and I want to put this on full screen. And I hope this works now. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for having me at this conference here today, talking about zero carbon transport by mid-century, rhetoric or reality. And thank you also, Madan. I think you did a perfect setting the scene for my presentation. So I think I can really underscore some of the points that you have made a little bit more. Just to say, for those who may not be very sure who GIZ is the development agency of the German government. So we implement international cooperation on behalf of the German government, and we work to shape a future worth living. And in the transport sector in particular, we collaborate with our partner countries, and a lot of them are based in Asia, often ministries of transports or departments of transport, on fostering sustainable and zero carbon mobility through policy and technical consultancy. And here I'd just like to briefly give you an overview of the project that I'm heading, the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, which has the objective to facilitate a paradigm shift to zero-emission transport across Asia. And this project is a collaboration by 7 organizations, as you can see on this slide. And we work on the one hand on really comprehensive decarbonization strategies in partner countries, but also towards higher ambition in the nationally determined contributions, which are the climate action plans that countries submit to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And Madan has already talked a little bit about that. We are financed through our German Ministry of Environment through the International Climate Initiative. And in the project, we work in China, India, and Vietnam on decarbonizing transport, both at national level as well as on city level, doing work on modeling, on the scenarios, some of the parts that Madan mentioned that are necessary to really understand where we have to reduce emissions and what are policy options. But I don't want to dwell too much on the project. Transforming transport is fundamental. According to the IEA, around 8 gigatons of CO2 emissions in 2019. What you can see here are the trajectories of current or announced policies, and this is a publication from last year. But what you can also see is in the green line where we have to bend the curve in order to really bring us onto a below 2 degree, ideally a 1.5 degree trajectory for transport. And this would allow, according to these calculations, still a residual around 2 gigatons for transport by 2050. But this means a 25% reduction below current levels. And this is, of course, a huge challenge, but it's one that is still possible if we collaborate and if we act now. So the next 10 years are really going to be decisive for this. So the question is, will Asia break that growth trend? Will Asia be at the forefront of really becoming more sustainable and carbon free? And I think there are some signs, and Asia is on the one hand quite well positioned to do this, but we need to do it in collaboration, as was already mentioned. Asian countries are stepping up ambition. This was last year, 2020, we had some of the large economies in Asia announce their decarbonization targets with China, South Korea, and Japan. And then this year at the COP26, where the climate negotiations happened just 1 month ago in Glasgow, many more countries stepped up to announce their decarbonization pledges. And this included, amongst others, India, Thailand, and also Vietnam. And I would like to, with different time horizons, some by 2050, some by 2070. But we can see there is a growing momentum and consensus that we need to bring emissions down to zero in Asia as well as in the rest of the world. Because I saw this comment in the chat as well, so maybe we can discuss this after the talks. So I wanted to highlight what Vietnam's Prime Minister said: climate change response must become the highest priority in all development decisions. And I think this is really a fundamental change. And if we take this seriously, this means changing a lot of the policies that are already in place, and phasing out fuel subsidy is definitely one of the levers that we have, and that can have a huge impact. And one that only makes economic sense as well, because there's no good argument for subsidizing fossil fuels at all. These were just examples. In total, 13 Asian countries already have net zero emission commitments in place. And this is, of course, economy-wide commitments, but a net zero commitment on economy-wide automatically means that transport needs to become carbon-free, because there will always be other sectors like agriculture or land use with residual emissions, but the energy consumption sectors, energy end-use sectors such as transport, really need to bring emissions down to zero. And what's more, apart from these global agreements, just in October, 20 countries in Asia adopted the 2030 Aichi Declaration. that was adopted at the 14th Environmentally Sustainable Transport Forum, and which includes a set of climate and sustainable development goals, including other aspects like access, but also road safety, another really important area for sustainable mobility in Asia. And I'm glad that the next session will look into that topic in more detail. So what you can also see here in this pie chart on the right is that out of the global transport sector emissions, 25% are now already covered by net zero targets, if we look at all the countries in Asia that have put these targets forth. So this is a really good starting point. And if implemented, this would bring, let's say, 25% of the global transport emissions down to zero by mid-century. However, as was also mentioned by Madan, countries really need to elaborate the pathways and policy packages to reach their climate and sustainability goals in the transport sector now. We also did an analysis of the how transport is covered in the updated NDCs. I've already shared a link to that in the chat. And we see that so far of the updated NDCs, only 16 countries included a transport sector greenhouse gas reduction target. So that's still very few. And this is definitely what we have to do now to really understand what is the right policy mix for different countries to achieve these climate targets. And generally speaking, and this is a graph from Agora Verkehrswende, who's one of the partners that we implement the NDC Transport Initiative with, and is a German think tank working towards the transformation of transport in Germany. And how we see it in Germany is that we need, on the one hand side, the mobility transition, and this is the avoid, shift, improve that Madan already elaborated. But at the same time, we need an energy transition in transport in order to ensure that the remaining demand will be carbon neutral. And in the German case, this is about 50-50. So 50% emission reductions from the mobility transition, but the other 50 also need to come from a transition in the energy system. So this nexus is really important to not only phase out coal, but also to really improve and increase the supply of renewable energies for direct electrification, but also for power fuels for aviation and shipping, where direct electrification is not possible. And I'd like to give one example, because this question in the talk was rhetoric or reality. So we have a lot of pledges out there now. I think this is really showing there is consensus on the need to move, and the next decade is the next 10 years are really the ones where we have to make these changes. But now there's also many good examples where step by step some things are being put into reality. So this is just an example from Hanoi, who just 2 weeks ago launched their first smart electric bus line, with 2 more lines to start operating before the end of the month, and another 6 more in 2022. Now, this was done by the city of Hanoi. What we are doing as part of the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia is to, together with the People's Committee of Hanoi, but also of Ho Chi Minh City, to develop economic and technical norms for e-buses in order to really be able to scale this up at a national scale. And these are the things that are now necessary to really translate those policy goals into regulation, into policy standards, etc., to allow us to implement the ambitions that have now been put on the table. And it's not only about electric mobility. Electric mobility is a very important piece of the puzzle. But in order to shift gears to a socially just and a zero carbon sustainable transport, we need to really look at the avoid and shift as well. And as was mentioned, not just look at passenger transport, but also freight transport. I won't have time to go into detail about all of these aspects here, but what I want to highlight is that it's not only about climate, it's really at the same time about achieving the other sustainable development goals, such as access, mobility, better urban life, and health and well-being at the same time. And as you can see here, we're also looking at ensuring a resilient transport system. So this is resilience towards the impacts of climate change, but here we also, now with the global pandemic, there's other shocks that the system needs to be resilient against. And what we believe is that we will only be able to have this paradigm shift as a multi-stakeholder dialogue, bringing together the public sector with academia, with civil society, and also the private sector. So as part of the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, we have set up the Council for Decarbonizing Transport in Asia. And the Council's mission is to visualize the change that is needed in order to develop a future sustainable transport system, and then shift the narrative away and provide also insight on how to overcome the concerns that are currently still holding back action, finally engaging with leaders in Asian countries. And I'm very glad that Dr. Yossapong, who's going to be the next speaker, is also a member of this council. And the council will publish its flagship report with recommendations next year in April. And some of the concerns, of course, are also about the socioeconomic impacts that we need to look into in order to make these systems more sustainable as well. So we need to have this dialogue with all actors together. And one practical example is from India, where Niti Aayog, the political partner that we work with in India, which is the government's think tank for transforming India, set up together with the World Resources Institute India, launched this platform, the Forum for Decarbonizing Transport, really as a platform to bring together different stakeholders and discuss steps forward for policy implementation. And after the launch, CEOs of key e-mobility companies have approached Niti Aayog directly to become part of this forum. So this really shows the interest and the need for dialogue to understand also the concerns of those that are implementing this revolution in the transport sector. And one thing I would like to mention is that I think that it's important that governments set the targets so that we do not, that we have strong targets in place, but then how to really bring those targets to life and what the right policy mix is and what is required really needs the stakeholder discussion. So another activity that we'll be doing starting next year is to really do an analysis and modeling of renewable-based transport system in India and what this would mean for the power demand and for the electricity grid as well, to really understand what the concerns are in this regard. And here too, we have had discussions, colleagues in India have had discussions with the electricity companies in India to understand what does this mean, a large rollout of charging infrastructure, and what impact does this have on the grid? What are priority steps that need to be taken in order to provide the ground for such a transition as well? And finally, before I come to an end, I would like to come back to the theme of this conference, transport for a better life. And in order for to achieve transport for a better life, we need to address the specific needs of women, children, the elderly, and people with disabilities as well. And I'd like to highlight this because I looked at the program of this conference, and I was, to be honest, a little bit shocked to see quite an gender imbalance in the lineup of the speakers. So I hope that there are a few more female participants, at least in this conference. So one thing that we've started in collaboration with others is to set up this network, Women on the Move, Transforming Transport in Asia, as a space for networking, for mutual empowerment and knowledge sharing on aspects of gender and mobility in Asia. And I'd like to invite everybody to join us, both women and men. Men can also support women in the transport sector. And to help us develop a more inclusive and sustainable transport system in Asia. And thank you very much. Here, if this is going to be shared later on, have some resources, both on mitigation. Also, we just launched another source book on adapting urban transport to climate change. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and having me here today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Urda. I think still early from you in Germany, and I think just to touch upon the point that our ATRANS Secretary General, Dr. Tianjia, is actually a woman too. So just to go in line with the transportation for women, and I think in Germany and in Asia, in Thailand as well. So I may delay some of the questions and comment toward the end. So we would like to proceed so that the audience can listen to all the three speakers. So next, may invite Associate Professor Dr. Yossapong Laoonual to come and give a talk on the case that on the decarbonization road transport to zero emission pathway for electric vehicles. So please, Dr. Yossapong.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nuong, and it's good to see familiar face, Dr. Regmi and the Urda, and thank you for joining today, Urda. So you make, we have women in our section too. So I think I could skip some of the slide here because I think the time limit and another two previous speaker already mentions a lot of it already. Right. So I might not have to mention much about it, why we need electric vehicle. Of course, there's a challenge on the climate change and the problem of the air pollution here. And I think Urda already mentions about that we probably need to reduce a lot of amount of CO2 from the transport sector. And when we try to talk about this kind of sustainability, normally when we talk about this, I use concept of 3P, right? So we probably talking about people, planet, and of course another thing is about prosperity. So we need to find balance of three of them. And I think in the previous two speakers and me one here know about the concept of the avoidance and improvement here. So today I'll focusing more about the improvements. That's why electric vehicle come in here. So when we talk about the electric vehicle, actually I want to step back a little bit. Actually, it's part of the what we call the new generation mobilities vehicles. They use the concept of, a case that a lot of automotive company already, discuss about this. So what the case stand for? Case stand for connected, autonomous, shared mobility, and electric vehicles. And we are now today focusing on the electric vehicle. But I think all this connected. If you talk about case, I think I'd like you to imagine about when you're talking about mobile phone 20 years ago. When we start changing from using landline telephone to the wireless mobile phone we are using today. Electric vehicle is something like that. When we are changing for internal combustion engines to using electric vehicle, right? So, but actually, this electric vehicle, it just started of what I think is what we call the next generation mobility or the smart mobility or smart vehicle. So in the future, I think the vehicle probably would, the new models, a lot of model, passenger vehicles, maybe including truck, and of course bus will be changing into electric vehicle. So the vehicle will changing into the word become, I think the future probably we call a smart vehicles. And that would be, including all these cases. When we're talking about electric vehicle, actually the word is quite difficult to, interpret it. Some country, when you talk about EV, they're talking about the battery electric vehicles. Some country, when you talk about EV, they're including hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and battery EV, including fuel cell, right? I could go a little bit into this figure more in detail. When we, everyone know internal combustion engine, we use the engine to run the vehicle, right? But when we're talking about the hybrid vehicle, HEV, so we have the engines and the motor. And of course, this vehicle, you're still using, the energy source is coming from the fuels. So motor is helping the engines to drive the vehicle. But then the hybrid have been developed more than 20 years. and engineer or develop into the plug-in hybrid vehicle. So as you see in the figure for the plug-in hybrid vehicle, you have a bigger battery, and you can charge the vehicle from you can charge electricity from the outside. And as you can see that the motor seems to be bigger. So this plug-in hybrid vehicle, you can run the vehicle can be run by either the engine itself or the motor, right? And probably they use both together. But then I think the highlight here, what we try to discuss is about battery electric vehicle. So it's no longer have engine, right? So mainly we use the energy source from the battery. So that means it rely a lot on the electricity from outside the vehicle. And this word, when we're talking about, in Thai, when we're talking about EV, probably people mean a lot on the battery EV here. But in terminologies, probably if you understand this, BEV actually mean the vehicle without the engines. And the last one, the fuel cell electric vehicle, I think this one, they use the energy source from the hydrogens. But of course, when you get the hydrogens, you really need to create these hydrogens. And the hydrogens normally coming from the electrolysis of the water. Of course, the vehicle is still running by the motor, and we have the fuel cell that convert the hydrogen into electricity, and that electrical supply to the motor. So all these four type of vehicle, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, battery EV, and fuel cell, they're also grouping into term when we're talking about electric vehicle. And nowadays in the global, when you're talking about the electric vehicle, I think mostly they are focusing on what we call plug-in electric vehicle, on the PHEV and the battery, the vehicle that you can charge and plug in from the electricity. However, I think that the trend seems to be moving into what we call zero-emission vehicle, right? So that means no longer have the engine into the vehicle, right? So I'd like to spend quite some time on this one because there are a lot of words. HEV stands for hybrid vehicle, plug-in hybrid, PHEV, and battery EV, and fuel cell. So now when I'm talking about HEV, PHEV, BEV, FCEV, so you can understand what I mean here. I make this slide to, for you guys to easy to understand when we try to compare. I didn't put the fuel cell here. When we try to compare the internal combustion engine, hybrid, and PHEV, as you can see that basically the technology is moving from the ICE into battery without the engines more and more. Okay. So this is a figure of how actually when we're talking about battery EV, so basically there's the motor, which is the main powertrain here to run the vehicle. And as you can see, the batteries, most of the electric vehicle now, the battery is at the bottom of the vehicles, and get the battery getting bigger and bigger, and more the energy is on here. Some technologies try to include the battery parts of the structure of the vehicle now, so they have a lot of discussion on how to develop this technology. And of course, when you see here, there's a lot of the electrical components here. And one thing that people, one thing that's still there is when you're using a lot of electrical components, you still need a cooling system. Some people say that when we're moving into the electric vehicle, there's no longer radiator, thing like that. But actually, when you're using these electrical components, the cooling system is very important. I think you heard the news about some vehicle in Thailand that they are, when they try to go to the mountain, very high mountain with the high slope, and somehow the vehicle stopped. That because of the vehicle is overheated, probably something with the cooling system that they have issue here. But as you can see, when we compare, this is a graph of what we call torque and the engine or motor speed. The orange one here is the torque of the electric vehicle, and the blue one is from internal combustion engines. As you can see, at the low speed, you have very high torque at the beginning. So that means that's why the engine vehicle mostly they have a transmission, a gear system, right? So that you have to changing the gear into getting the high torque at the low speed. But as you can see here, the electric vehicle, the battery electric vehicle, you don't actually need a complicated transmission system to change the torque. So basically, it's very simple. So as you can see, there's some, not a lot of module in here, and it seems to be this technology is much more easier in the future when you try to get the battery price cheaper. I will go to that in detail a little bit more, right? And here, when we're talking about what about the CO2 generated, when we try to compare, from the internal combustion engine to the battery EVs and also fuel cell electric vehicle. You need to think about, how we get the fuel from, the energy from, and until, that energy running into the vehicle. So what we call here is from the tank to wheel and the wheel to tanks. And also we should including the how the vehicle manufacturing and how the battery manufacturing too, right? All this, we need to consider all of them. So as you can see that, if you look at this is the average data, right? So for the ICE engine, so probably the whole lives of the internal combustion engine, you generate about 35, tons of CO2. And if you compare with the battery EV, it could be between 25 to just above 25 tons. So as you can see that there's still, the difference is that for the internal combustion engines, you see a lot of the tank to wheel fuel cycle here, right? So basically that is coming from when you running by the engines, you generate CO2 during that time. But from the electric vehicles, it's the yellow is very small because there's no engines, but you see the orange one, so the well to tank cycle. So that means it depends on, what source of the energy you're using to produce electricity. And that's, in the future, if you use more on this part as a renewable energy, that means this orange would be much more reducing, right? Okay. Right, so at the moment, so we have about, look at the, when we're talking about battery EVs and PHEV here, so this graph is to show that we now have more than, I think in year 2021, we probably have more than 12 million vehicles of the plug-in EV. This is PHEV and battery EVs. As you can see, the country that have the most of this type of vehicle is China, and then Europeans, and then the US, right? And then if you look at the category of what category of vehicles, so a lot of them still in the passenger vehicles for the electric vehicle. And if we look at the last year, 2020, so China is the top. They have the highest number of the plug-in electric vehicle, right? And then in terms of the share of the plug-in EVs, I think at the moment, Norway have the market share of, in 2020, is market share of 74%. And I think now at the moment, probably more than, I could not have the number, but probably more than 80 now. And if you know that the Norway already announced that in 2025, they will have 100% of the market share for the electric vehicles. And here is some interesting number from the Bloombergs. They are predicting, how many vehicle sales per year. So we are here about 2021. So this is the effect of COVID. So the market is shrinking at the moment, but they will gaining in probably in 2024, 2025. And as you can see that the number of the batteries will be increasing, and there probably will be more than 50% around 2030 to 2035. And on the right-hand side is also the same number, but the same category, but in terms of in Southeast Asia here. So as you can see that in Southeast Asia, we have we use the vehicle around about 2 million passenger vehicle a year. And also I think the challenge of the electric vehicle is the cost of electric vehicle. If we look back into 2016 and compare to the yellow line here, the internal combustion engines, you can see that the price of electric vehicles a lot of much higher than compared to internal combustion engines. So they are predicting that around 2024, 2025, the price of electric vehicle and the internal combustion engines will have no difference. The main reason is about the battery cost. So the cost of battery used to be like 40, almost 50%. So now the cost is become less and less, 30%, and will be much cheaper. And actually, this not including like the operating cost. If you're using the battery EV, the operating cost will be much cheaper. And as you can see, the price of the battery is, decreased dramatically as the exponential, not in the linear. As you can see that the price, some people, I think estimate that in next 5 to 10 years, the battery will be, even at the moment it's around 100 something US dollar per kilowatt hour. So they are predicting would be less than 100 US dollar per kilowatt hours. Yeah. Right. Another issue about the electric vehicle is about the charging. Right. People will say that the electric vehicle will use longer time to do the charging. But actually, if you use electric vehicle, most of the people who are using at the moment, probably they have the charger at home, so they can actually charge overnight, right? You go back, whatever, 10 p.m. you can charge overnight, come back in the morning, it's full. But of course, some people could not, could not do that at home. Probably they have to rely on public chargings. When you use public charging, that's the issue that, if in the future, the standard of electric vehicle to drive about 400 kilometers per charge, with today's technology, with the 50 kilowatt, probably would take you about 1.5 hours. But I think now the trend of the charging will increasing to 350 kilowatt power. And that would take you about just 12 minutes. So thinking about if you're traveling from Bangkok to Chiang Mai with about 700 kilometers, so probably you can stop every 200 or 300 kilometers. So probably you can charging the vehicles and go to grab a coffee. The coffee is still not finished, but your charging will already finished at that time. So and now in some countries like in Thailand, I think the charging infrastructure have been expanded a lot more. And people are talking about from 350 up to 500 kilowatt. But actually 350 already have in the commercial vehicle with the existing vehicles like, but probably expensive one like Porsche, but that will be decreasing. As you see, the battery price is decreasing domestically during last 10 years. I think this also the same technology will move up to 350 kilowatt very soon. Right. Another things about electric vehicle that when we're talking about electric vehicle, you only think that will charge electricity in 2 vehicles, right? But in another way, the electric vehicle, there's a battery inside. So actually, it's kind of you have the energy storage in your vehicle, right? So this can be used as energy storage into for your home. And as you can see, this is some scenario that you can use it. For example, when you're using the solar at home, you can charge the vehicle from the solar energies. You can use it for the peak cut. If you, for example, if there's some high peak and there's some mechanism that they could ask you to to discharge your electricity from your vehicle back to the grid. And then probably to helping to reduce the peak cut with some of the the cost, the money that you get back when you're doing that. Or some of the issues, like for example, you have some backup, as some case you have backout, so you can use electricity from your vehicle, back to your home. Of course, and if you do it right, you can do the demand optimization. So they're talking about you don't actually doesn't need the more power plant if you can do managing this energy storage quite well. I think when Japan have the problems in a tsunami in 2011, I think they used this electric vehicle to supply the electricity back into the area. There's no electricity at that time. Yeah, that's what I heard too. Okay. I'd like to show some of example of the projects here in Thailand that's quite interesting here. This company called Hopcar, I think one of the founders here, Adan Salon here also. I think they're doing the car sharing and also the EV car sharing. This is one of the interesting companies that they try to use the EV and the car sharing together. And I think when you're talking about electric vehicle at the moment, the cost is so high, expensive. But when you're doing in sharing things, so people can, have a chance to use electric vehicle. People can access to vehicles. So that probably would be answer the sustainability things I mentioned at the beginnings here. And the last one, I think probably, not last slide, but this is another sharing ride-hailing in Thailand. They're using we are moving into electric vehicle. I think tuk-tuk is, I think that we should move it to the electric tuk-tuk. So I saw this project in Chulalongkorn, and I can see that they expanded into many areas. So you can call, when you, get out from the BTS, some station like Ali, and you want to go to a small road, you can call this tuk-tuk taxi to take you to at your last mile delivery. So I think this is quite interesting that with the new technology, you can also have the new companies start up to pair with. And the last one, I think that I'd like to conclude here that, this kind of EVs is, you need probably, some cooperation to working. I think it's quite new. People say that will take some time, but I'm working with this topic during the last, 10 years. I see they're coming fast and more accelerated at this time. So probably need the governments, of course, academic like me, they asked here, and some corporate companies and all the community to working together. And probably there will be a chance for a new company, like startup company, to working on this kind of EVs thing too. So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yossapong, for your presentation. And I think we have about 4 minutes left for some quick question and answer here. So I'm not sure if any of I think our three speakers still online with us, or any comment or quick comment question from the floor or online, please. Of course, I think there are already some chatting in the Zoom chat. I think there are some exchanging in terms of the report, and I think the first Dr. Madan Regmi already showed some of the information regarding the report from the UNESCAP, with especially some statistics in Asia. I think followed by I think Dr. Urda also showing that especially her NDC effort, in Asia, and especially I think involving Dr. Yossapong also as a council for this NDC low carbon transport, I think, and also some of the activity has shown by Dr. Yossapong here. So maybe I just ask one question. I think I'm very interested in what Dr. Regmi has mentioned about informal transport, which I think may link back with the project in Thailand. And Dr. Yossapong just mentioned about the three-wheeler for electrified tuk-tuk. Can you say a bit more on the informal transport and the role of the first and last mile mobility?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think the Nuong is a really right question. So because I think the why I structure my presentation that way is that basically what we tend to do is that we try to more focus on the passenger car, but when you see that actually, and the passenger car and the public transport, and then our modeling also showed that actually, okay, this electric mobility and the energy efficiency, these are the most effective way. But I think we have to look at the whole structure of the transport. So in Asia, actually, basically the Asia, and then the most of the passenger actually because we have the very different level of economy. Actually, in the Bangkok, motorbike, taxi, and then these tuk-tuk actually, as a Professor Assoc.Prof.Dr. showed, actually those are, I think there are already many initiatives in Asia about making this informal transport electric. Just like in Nepal, actually there is we call it Safa Tempo, that's a clean tempo three-wheeler, but it carries about 12 passengers. And then there is, I think, the Urda very rightly mentioned about the inclusiveness. Actually, please look at my report. Actually, the inclusiveness is really the one of the part of this. So that's what we are saying. You have to make it sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. These are the three actually integrated component of those things. So, and those electric tempo are driven by the women, actually more than 50%, and that is running there. And it's really the clean energy. And Dr. Yossapong said, I think the battery technology is improving, cost is reducing, charging time is reducing, that is it. And then if you go at the Philippines, actually it's really popular there, the paratransit, and they are transitioning those two also electric mobility. They have the program there. In China and Bangladesh also, you have this three-wheeler like tuk-tuk, but different than Thailand. But they are also transforming those to electric mobility. But I think the safety and other concern is there. But whatever you have in the street, actually, you have to make those sustainable. And even in I think the Laos also, there is a project about the electric bike. I think the safety and the lighter thing is there, but you have to take those things. And then a second thing I want to mention about was many people are walking also. And then there is a big shift toward the walking after the COVID-19. And what we have to main important is that give them a good structure to the infrastructure to the walk. Actually, maybe with the green shade, maybe linking to the park if they are walking more. And just like I was just this morning in the Rajprasam area, you have a really fancy, high, elevated walkway. People like to walk there. You don't need those expensive things, but if you want to make something on the side by lane and maybe segregated lane up for the cycling, and there are I think something in the Thailand also. You make this bicycle lane green and these things. So what I'm saying is that you look at the whole structure of the transport. Don't only focus on the car and buses, but try to look at the informal sector, which they need the support of the government also, and then make them more sustainable. So basically that is my humble submission, and then we are trying to address that also. So I think thank you for that
thank
question.
you very much. And I think
please have a look at the report I have put there, and then we have tried to address the three elements I said. I think the inclusiveness, sustainability, and then resilience, and that is impact pivotal. Thank you very much. Thank you for the time.
thank you very much, and also thanks Dr. Urda also then for sharing, I think the report that are in the chat box, but I think we have to move on. So of course, I think we have your contact. So, and if we like to link up, especially with your coming up report in April next year, I think that will be something that we can try to move the Asia toward the NDC and to achieve the carbon neutrality by the year 2050. So thank you very much for all the speakers in this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.